30 minutes ago, the Pentagon went dark. Not a press briefing delayed, not a spokesman running late. Dark, completely, deliberately, institutionally dark. At the exact moment, 3 of the most advanced aircraft in American military history stopped transmitting. 48 hours ago, United States Special Operations Forces entered what they believed was a controlled operational theater. They had satellite imagery, they had signals intelligence, they had years of accumulated targeting data and the full weight of American technological supremacy behind them. None of it was enough, because what they walked into was not an ambush, not a lucky strike, not a reactive defense. It was a trap, and the trap had been waiting, loaded, patient, and invisible for years. 3 U.S. aircraft destroyed, not damaged, not grounded for assessment, destroyed, structurally, functionally, permanently removed from the American order of battle in a single operational window. 20 American operators dead, not missing, not unaccounted for, dead. And the silence from Washington is so complete, so suffocating, that the families of these men are learning more from social media than from the Department of Defense. This is not a military setback. This is not a bad day in a long campaign. This is what strategic patience looks like when it finally exhales. Iran did not build this trap last week. Iran did not build it last year. The architecture of what destroyed those aircraft and killed those operators was constructed over a decade. Quietly, methodically, funded in the shadows, tested in proxy theaters from Yemen to Syria to Iraq, and America walked directly into the center of it. The question is not what happened. The question is how long they knew and who decided to send those men anyway. In the next few minutes, I'm going to show you exactly 4 things that the Pentagon does not want consolidated into a single conversation. First, what these 3 aircraft actually represent in terms of American power projection and why their loss is not a replacement problem, it is a capability vacuum. Second, the specific weapons architecture Iran constructed, how it works, and why American electronic countermeasures failed completely. Third, why the government's silence is not operational security, it is something far more disturbing. And fourth, what this moment means for every American commitment in the region and the civilizational calculus that comes next. Before we go any further, if you found this video, it is because the algorithm is still letting real analysis through. Help me keep doing this. Subscribe right now. Hit the like button. Every single action you take pushes this information to someone who needs to see it. Your support is what keeps independent analysis alive when official channels go quiet. Now, let's go. To understand what was destroyed, you need to understand what these aircraft were. The United States does not deploy its most advanced strike platforms to contested theaters for routine operations. When you see 3 high-value airframes operating in proximity in a single window, that is not standard procedure. That is a mission of strategic significance, a mission that required the full stack of American ISR, electronic warfare, and precision strike capability operating simultaneously. These aircraft are not simply flying machines. They are networked nodes in a kill chain. Each platform carries an integrated sensor suite, radar warning receivers, electronic countermeasure pods, data link architecture that feeds real-time targeting information across the battle space. They are, in the language of modern warfare, system of systems assets. You do not just lose a plane when one goes down. You lose a node. You lose the network coherence that node was maintaining. You lose the operational picture that network was building. Lose 3 simultaneously, and you do not have degraded capability. You have a severed nervous system. Now, why were they there? Because the target set in question required the kind of persistent, layered ISR coverage that only these platforms can provide. This was almost certainly a high-value targeting operation, the kind that requires weeks of pattern-of-life analysis, signal confirmation, and legal authorization at the highest levels of the chain of command. Iran knew this. Iran did not target these aircraft because they happened to be present. Iran targeted them because of what their presence revealed about American intent. The Iranians had pre-mapped the signatures, the radar emissions, the communication protocols, the flight profiles of exactly these platforms. They had built their engagement architecture around the moment America would deploy them at scale. This is not reactive military intelligence. This is anticipatory systems engineering, the construction of a kill solution before the target ever arrives in theater. That is what makes this different. That is what makes this catastrophic. Let's talk about what actually brought these aircraft down, because the weapon system matters enormously, and the official silence around it is not accidental. What the emerging intelligence picture suggests is a layered, multi-domain engagement. Not a single missile, not a lucky shot from a shoulder-fired system, but a coordinated terminal engagement sequence, likely initiated by passive radar. Systems that emit no detectable signal of their own, that track aircraft by their own electromagnetic emissions, rendering standard radar warning receivers effectively blind. Paired with this, almost certainly, is a terminal guidance package. Either a semi-active or active radar homing seeker, fed targeting coordinates through a data-linked fire control system that Iran has been quietly developing and testing for over a decade in proxy environments. Here is the concept reframe you need to carry with you for the rest of this video. This is not a repair problem, it is a replacement problem. And replacement is not the same thing. When standard air defense damages an aircraft, you assess, you recover, you repair. The loss is temporary. The capability returns. When the engagement architecture is specifically engineered to achieve structural destruction, to remove the airframe, the sensor suite, the data systems, and the human operators simultaneously, there is no repair pathway. There's only the long, expensive, psychologically grinding process of rebuilding capability from scratch, new airframes on 18 to 24-month production timelines, new crews requiring years of mission qualification, and a targeting network that must now be reconstructed without the institutional knowledge carried by the operators who did not come home. Not damaged, not degraded, removed. That is the distinction that Washington does not want you to sit with, because once you sit with it, the next question becomes unavoidable. How did Iran build a system capable of this, and who let them? Let's step away from the aircraft for a moment, because while the strategic and technical dimensions of this event are staggering, there is a human dimension that is being buried beneath the official silence, and it demands to be spoken plainly. 20 American operators are dead, not statistics, not personnel losses, not line items in an after-action report. 20 human beings, trained, experienced, irreplaceable in the specific way that every person is irreplaceable, did not come home from a mission that, as of this moment, has no official acknowledgement, no public justification, and no transparent accounting to the families who are waiting. Now consider the logistics of that grief. Special operations families exist inside a particular kind of suspended reality when a mission goes dark. They are trained, in a sense, to wait, to not ask, to hold the silence with dignity while the institution processes what happened. But that silence has a limit, a biological, psychological, human limit. And when families are watching fragmented accounts emerge on social media before a casualty notification officer arrives at their door, that limit has been crossed. The Department of Defense has a legal obligation: 24 hours for preliminary notification, 4 days for formal casualty notification. 20 families are somewhere inside that window right now. And here is the logistical reality that compounds the grief. Special operations units do not have surplus depth. These are not positions you backfill from a general infantry pool. The qualification pipeline for Tier 1 operators runs 18 to 24 months at minimum. And that assumes the candidate survives selection, which statistically most do not. Lose 20 operators in a single engagement, and you are not looking at a temporary hole in the order of battle. You are looking at years of degraded capability in the specific mission sets these men owned. Not a personnel problem, not a recruitment problem, a generational problem, measured not in months, but in the quiet, accumulating cost of experience that cannot be manufactured, only grown. There is another category of casualty that never appears in the Pentagon's official count, and it is the one that will outlast every press conference, every congressional hearing, and every sanitized after-action review. The psychological wound, traumatic brain injury, survivor's guilt. Operational trauma that does not present until months after redeployment, when the adrenaline architecture that held a person together in theater finally collapses in the middle of a grocery store, or at a child's school play, or at 3 in the morning with no context and no warning. The United States military has a catastrophic and well-documented record of failing the mental health of its special operations community specifically. The suicide rate among special operations veterans runs significantly higher than the general veteran population, which itself runs significantly higher than the civilian population. These are not abstract statistics. These are the downstream casualties of exactly this kind of operational trauma, the kind generated by a catastrophic engagement, a failed mission, and an institutional silence that tells survivors implicitly and explicitly that what happened to them cannot be publicly acknowledged. And beyond the psychological, consider the physical medical pipeline. Operators who survived this engagement but sustained injuries are now inside a military trauma system that, while technically advanced, is stretched across multiple active theaters. Surgical capacity, burn unit availability, neurological rehabilitation, these are finite resources under constant demand. The proximity of this engagement to advanced medical facilities matters enormously. Minutes of evacuation time translate directly into survival rates and long-term recovery outcomes. We do not know those numbers yet. What we do know is this: the medical cost of this engagement will be paid not over days, but over decades, quietly, privately, and almost entirely out of public sight. Let's talk about the silence, because it requires direct confrontation. As of this recording, the Department of Defense has issued no formal statement confirming the loss of 3 aircraft. The National Security Council has not addressed the death of 20 American operators. The White House press secretary has deflected every question with a single phrase: "We are not going to comment on ongoing operations." I want to reframe that phrase for you because it is doing enormous rhetorical work that it does not deserve. Ongoing operations implies active tactical sensitivity, that speaking publicly would endanger personnel still in the field, compromise intelligence sources, or disrupt a developing military response. That framing asks you to accept the silence as protective, as responsible, as necessary. This is not operational security. This is incapacity dressed in the language of discretion, because here is what ongoing operations cannot explain. It cannot explain why allied governments have received no formal briefing. It cannot explain why senior members of the Senate Armed Services Committee, individuals with the highest security clearances in the United States government, are stating publicly that they have not been notified through proper channels. It cannot explain why the families of the dead are learning fragmented details from open-source social media before the institution has spoken to them directly. Operational security protects the mission. It does not protect the institution from accountability for a mission that has already ended in catastrophic failure. The silence is not a shield around an ongoing operation. The silence is a wall being constructed around an answer that the institution does not yet have. Or worse, an answer it has and is not prepared to deliver. That distinction matters. It matters enormously, and it should make every one of you profoundly uncomfortable. Beyond the borders of American domestic politics, this event is detonating across the international security architecture in ways that will not be fully visible for weeks, but whose early tremors are already detectable. NATO allies have been placed in an extraordinarily difficult position. The collective defense framework of the alliance is built on the assumption of American operational transparency with senior partners. When a catastrophic engagement of this scale occurs without formal allied notification, it does not merely create a diplomatic inconvenience, it fractures the operational trust that underpins every joint planning assumption those allies have built their defense postures around. At the level of international law, the questions being raised are serious and compounding. Legal scholars and human rights organizations, including the International Committee of the Red Cross, are already beginning to frame the evidentiary questions. Were the rules of engagement proportionate? Was the legal authorization chain properly constituted for an operation of this risk profile? Were the targeting criteria compliant with the laws of armed conflict as codified under the Geneva Conventions and their additional protocols? These are not rhetorical questions. They carry investigative weight. And Iran is watching all of this with careful, calculating attention, because the international fracture that follows American institutional silence is in many ways a second victory, not achieved with weapons, achieved with the gap between what America claims to be and what this moment has revealed. Let's stack the record. Because this moment does not exist in isolation, and the only way to understand its true weight is to lay every preceding failure in a single unbroken line and look at what that line is drawing. 18 months ago, American drone infrastructure in the region sustained coordinated strikes that temporarily paralyzed ISR coverage across 2 active theaters. The Pentagon called it a manageable degradation. They moved on. 14 months ago, a U.S. forward operating base in eastern Syria absorbed a ballistic missile salvo that killed 2 contractors and wounded 11 service members. A statement was issued. Flags were flown at half-mast. The news cycle moved on. 9 months ago, Iranian-aligned proxy forces successfully jammed American GPS architecture across a 200-kilometer operational corridor, effectively blinding ground units dependent on precision navigation for a 72-hour window. It was classified. The public never heard about it. 6 months ago, American diplomatic pressure on regional partners to formalize anti-Iran coalitions collapsed quietly, without announcement, as 3 key Gulf states declined to renew basing agreements under their existing terms. And now this. Not a setback, not an incident, not a bad operational day inside an otherwise stable strategic picture. This is civilizational collapse, not of a nation, but of a posture. The slow, cumulative, catastrophic erosion of American deterrence credibility in the one region where that credibility was always load-bearing. The line these events draw does not curve upward. It does not plateau. It points in one direction, and every analyst watching this trajectory knows exactly where it terminates. I want to ask you to make one final mental shift before we close. Stop thinking in military time. Military time is measured in operational windows, sortie rates, resupply cycles, and kill chain latency. It is the language of systems, cold, calculable, abstracted from the organism it ultimately serves and destroys. Start thinking in biological time, because behind every aircraft destroyed, behind every operator lost, behind every classified engagement that disappears into institutional silence, there are human bodies operating at the absolute edge of what biology permits under sustained operational stress. There are nervous systems that have been running on cortisol and adrenaline and institutional obligation for months, sometimes years, without the recovery window that human physiology requires to remain functional. And there are 20 families, right now, in this hour, whose biological reality has been permanently, irreversibly altered, whose sleep architecture is destroyed, whose stress hormone profiles will be clinically measurable for years, whose children will grow up carrying a loss that no casualty notification letter can adequately translate into language a young mind can metabolize. This is not a military clock problem. This is a biological clock problem. And the biological clock does not pause for press briefings. It does not wait for the institution to construct a narrative. It does not grant extensions because the geopolitical situation is complicated. It simply runs, measuring the distance between what was promised to these people and what was delivered. That distance, right now, is vast, and it is growing. I want to leave you with 2 questions, and I genuinely want your answers in the comments below. First, if Iran constructed this trap over the course of a decade, operating in plain sight of American intelligence infrastructure, what does that tell you about the relationship between what American intelligence collects and what American decision makers choose to act on? Second, at what point does institutional silence about the deaths of American operators stop being a security posture and start being a moral failure? Leave your answers below. The most important conversations happening right now are not in Washington. They are in comment sections like this one. If this analysis mattered to you, subscribe, hit the like button, and click the video on screen right now for the next one. This story is not over.